Part 1. Nonverbal communication. A teachable skill that every child should master. The language of relationships. Some years ago, after I had just finished giving a talk about the importance of nonverbal communication at a local preschool, a concerned parent approached me about her 4-year-old son, Jack. With an anxious look on her face, she explained that Jack was having trouble making friends at school. According to his teachers, it wasn't that he was mean or rude to his classmates. He just seemed to have a knack for annoying them. On my next visit to the school, I had a chance to observe Jack in the company of his classmates at various times of the day. At the end of my visit, I had to concede that he certainly had a way of upsetting his fellow students. The problem wasn't anything he said. Rather, it was how he interacted with others nonverbally. Jack was a world-class space invader. In his interactions with his peers, he stood too close to them and then moved closer as time passed. Soon he was bumping into everyone around him, irritating them even more. Jack seemed to have little idea of the interpersonal havoc he was creating. I felt his mother ought to have a chance to see what I was seeing, so I asked her to come along with me on my next visit to the school so we could observe Jack together. Sure enough, just as before, Jack crowded in on all his classmates, who would either move as far away as they could the second they saw him coming, or simply treat him as if he weren't there. As we watched these encounters, I explained to Jack's mother that Jack seemed to be unaware of the unspoken boundaries delineating personal space. She confessed that he might not have learned about this unspoken rule because he was an only child and hadn't had many chances to interact with other children before he began preschool. I suggested a couple of simple ways she could help him to understand personal space and be more conscious about respecting it. One of these involved having him sit in a chair or stand with a circle of masking tape about 4 feet in diameter, the appropriate distance for social interaction, placed on the floor. I met with Jack's mother a week later, and she seemed pleased, reporting that the masking tape circle had done the job of making invisible spatial boundaries more visible to Jack. In fact, she said, they had great fun practicing how close or far away to stand. She even invited the next-door neighbor's child to come and play their how far to stand away and how close to get game. By bringing Jack's mistake into his awareness and directly teaching him how to correct it, the social problem was soon resolved. When I returned to the school 2 weeks later, Jack was smiling a lot more and having a much more pleasant time with his classmates. We all know children like Jack, kids who just can't seem to get life right at times. They really want others to like them, but the harder they try, the worse they seem to do. In most cases, their social problems aren't the result of a learning disability, autism, or any obvious disorder, but rather something so basic it is easy to overlook. They just haven't had enough opportunities to learn the nonverbal language skills critical to being socially successful. We often assume that the most popular kids are always the smartest or funniest or most attractive kids in their class. But in reality, they are simply the kids who have learned how to make interacting with them comfortable and easy. Every now and again, we psychologists see cases of children for whom genetic, biological, or emotionally traumatizing events, especially in early childhood, can produce extreme difficulties in interpreting others' nonverbal signals and or expressing themselves nonverbally. This is seen most clearly for children on the autism spectrum and those diagnosed with nonverbal learning disorders. My colleague Marshall Duke and I coined a term for significant nonverbal deficits. Dysemias, dis meaning difficulty, semia signs, a difficulty in processing nonverbal cues. Yet with the right approaches and consistent practice, even children with dysemias can learn the nonverbal skills they need to improve the quality of their social interactions, providing clear evidence that every child, no matter their current skill level, can get better at using and understanding nonverbal language in the same way that any child can become more proficient in any other skill, like math or reading. While Jack's story had a happy ending, I wondered then, as I do now, what would have happened if we hadn't uncovered the nonverbal shortcoming that was causing him to struggle socially. How would the consistent rejection have affected him emotionally as the months and years passed? How many of our children, like Jack, find themselves socially disconnected from their peers because they haven't developed the nonverbal skills they need to interact successfully? And why, despite its tremendous importance, do we still allow nonverbal communication to fly under our collective social radar? A matter of life and death. From the moment we're born until we draw our last breath, we are forming relationships with those around us. The importance of these relationships cannot be overstated. As adults, we know that we need strong relationships to feel fulfilled, supported, and on solid ground. Conversely, if we struggle to make relationships work, it doesn't matter how rich or smart or attractive we are, we're going to have a harder time in life. Relationships, in fact, are literally a matter of life and death. Research has repeatedly shown that infants who get enough to eat and drink but are not sufficiently nurtured by others' touch, positive facial expressions, and warm voices can develop what is called failure to thrive syndrome, in which lack of external stimulation deprives the brain of the activation it needs for healthy social and emotional development. And these infants lose weight and, even in extreme cases, die. On a more positive note, research also shows that people who have better relationships are more likely to live longer and healthier lives. One study found that patients undergoing open heart surgery who were happily married were 3 times more likely to survive the surgery than those who weren't. Sir Michael Rudder, the renowned British psychiatrist who studied resilience, found that kids coming from very challenging backgrounds end up doing well in life as long as they have just one good adult relationship, whether with a family member, a teacher, or someone in the community. We could not live for very long without relationships. But as Harry Stack Sullivan, the father of American psychiatry, argued, the benefits of relationships go beyond mere survival. Sullivan warned that one of the most painful and frightening experiences we can have as human beings is to feel alone, abandoned, or disconnected from others. Or as the author and journalist Melissa Fay Green has put it, the difference between no friends and one good friend is like the difference between a pitch black room and one lit by birthday candles. Sullivan was among the first major psychological practitioners and theorists to emphasize the important role relationships play in our emotional development, arguing that the most significant determiner of our behavior and personality is how we interact with others. Prior to his writings, the prevailing view was championed by Sigmund Freud, who was more concerned with what was going on inside of our psychic space, rather than emphasizing Freud's psychosexual stages of oral, anal, phallic, latent, and genital. Sullivan believed our personality developed as a product of the increasingly complex social interactions we navigate over the course of our lives. According to Sullivan, childhood development is best understood as the process of learning the different relationship skills needed to progress from one milestone to the next as we move from less complex to more complex relationships. Each phase requires a unique set of skills, but the one thing that was consistent throughout all phases of development, he found, was the importance of nonverbal communication. It's a testament to the power of nonverbal communication that the bond between parent and child, probably one of the most intense and intimate relationships you'll ever experience, is forged during the first year of life. Before your child is able to utter or understand the meaning of a single word. In fact, infants are born with a rudimentary set of behaviors that seemed designed to forge such bonds by enticing others to pay attention to them in a nurturing way. One could even call it a survival instinct, given that babies are entirely dependent on their adult caregivers for food, shelter, protection, and all the basic resources they need to survive. Whereas many other species adopt a strength in numbers strategy for survival of their young and produce thousands of eggs in hope that some few will survive by sheer chance, humans, along with most mammals, use a very different approach to guarantee their offspring will survive. They have fewer young, but they invest more energy, time, and attention to be sure that each one lives and thrives. A few years back, this concept was brought home to me when I was lucky enough to spend some time in the lab of Philippe Rochet, a well-known developmental psychologist and colleague of mine at Emory University. Rochet was recreating the famous still face experiment first carried out by the American psychologist Edward Tronick in 1975. When Tronick began his studies, there was a disagreement within the field about whether infants could manage the turn-taking and back-and-forth communication of an ongoing social interaction. Tronick's studies supported the idea that they can. In his landmark study, Tronick had mothers playfully interact with their infants, who ranged in age from 8 months to a year, for a couple of minutes before asking them to stop what they were doing and to be silent and still. No more smiles and happy voices for their baby. Instead, they should maintain a neutral expression and say nothing. On the day I showed up to observe, Philippe was attempting to replicate the Tronic experiment using female lab assistants in place of the mothers. This time I watched from behind a one-way mirror as a young woman and a baby engaged each other with smiles and happy voices. Then, on cue, the lab assistant suddenly became motionless and silent. Undeterred, the baby kept smiling and making cooing noises for a while, but her smile soon disappeared when she received no response. Philippe told me his lab assistants had needed intensive training in order to be able to resist the baby's nonverbal attempts to draw them into interactions. And it was easy to see why. Before too long, the baby went back to smiling and making noises again, but not so joyfully this time. Again, the lab assistant resisted the nonverbal pleas to engage, and the baby became still again, looking away. I was sure this 11-month-old had given up on trying to make this interaction work, but then she did something extraordinary. She turned her head back, looked earnestly at the lab assistant, raised her hands, put on a dazzling smile, and began to clap hands together to invite the trainee to play patty cake. I nearly lost it watching this infant's plea to be engaged by this young woman. Fortunately, within a few seconds, another cue was given, and the trainee's face lit up with a wonderful smile. Almost instantly, the infant went from forlorn to joyous again. As this experiment demonstrates, infants are actively motivated to invite others to interact with them and to do whatever is necessary to sustain that interaction. Even in infancy, before children are able to talk, they will pursue relationships forcefully and use whatever nonverbal tools they have at their disposal to engage with anyone who is present, even a perfect stranger. Initially, children seek connection as a survival instinct, but this desire for connection doesn't go away once they become old enough to tend to their own basic needs. The problem is that when these kids get a bit older, these instinctive methods that served them well in infancy are no longer effective or appropriate. Imagine if a 5-year-old giggled and gurgled to get his mother's attention. While it is obvious to most how important nonverbal language is in the lives of infants and toddlers who either cannot speak yet or have a limited vocabulary, the exciting things children begin to do with words can quickly overshadow nonverbal communication as a way of connecting. And yet, when it comes to communicating emotions, the very foundation of any relationship, nonverbal language far outweighs verbal language in terms of importance. As the nonverbal communication expert Albert Mehrabian notes, when emotional messages are transmitted between people, only 7% of their meaning is communicated through spoken words, while a full 38% is transmitted through tone of voice and 55% through body language. Not all researchers agree with these exact percentages, but most support the notion that children need to be proficient in both languages to make relationships work. How nonverbal language develops. We've all met those enviable individuals who appear to have a gift for drawing people in, who are captivating to listen to, who are enjoyable to be around. These people seem happy, and their cheerfulness rubs off on everyone around them. Although we may not be aware of it at the time, chances are that the reason we respond so positively to these individuals has a lot to do with the warm and inviting expressions on their faces, the way that they modulate their voices to heighten the emotional impact of a story, and how they lean toward us ever so slightly and nod intently when we speak. In so doing, they are letting us know that they see us, they like us, and they want a deeper connection with us, making it exceedingly easy for us to feel the same about them in return. And they do all this without putting it into words. This is what you want your children to be able to do when they're adults. Just as basic reading, writing, and arithmetic set the stage for the more complex intellectual and mathematical learning that follows, basic nonverbal skills provide the foundation for the more advanced emotional and social skills children develop later on. So building a strong foundation in childhood, in other words, paves the way to healthy, fulfilling, and sustainable adult relationships. With your help, any child can learn the skills they need to become a better nonverbal communicator. And it's possible to start at any age. The younger the better, but it's never too late. If you want to be able to support your child in developing these skills, you need to understand how they're acquired, starting from the earliest stages of development. Infancy, birth to age 2. The first phase ranges from birth to around 2 years of age and ends with the introduction of verbal language. In infancy, of course, a child's skills are exclusively nonverbal. And as we have seen, infants are born with a rudimentary set of behaviors that help them obtain the attention and nurturing they crave. For infants, communication with parents and caregivers is relatively simple. They cry if they're physically uncomfortable or hungry, and you respond to meet these needs. If infants' signals work, that is, if they produce consistent and positive responses from others, then within the first couple of months, the infant will begin to perceive that what they do is connected to what happens to them. The awareness that their actions have consequences, positive or negative, provides a foundation for understanding the necessary give and take of interpersonal interactions that will become more important as they mature. As they learn that their actions produce reactions in those around them, infants also begin to sense that they are separate from the faces they see, the voices they hear, and the bodies that inhabit the space around them. With this awareness comes the first inkling of a basic distinction between self and other. This understanding sets the stage for the first and perhaps most significant relationship we develop in our life, the attachment relationship. Although infants show rapid growth physically, cognitively, and emotionally during their first year of life, the attachment between infants and their caregivers is forged entirely through the nonverbal channels of rhythm, facial expressions, tones of voice, personal space, and touch. Sullivan believed that the reflected appraisals of significant others help infants to know not only that they are separate from others, but also whether they are viewed positively or negatively by those others. If infants are surrounded by caregivers who are responsive, smiling, and happy, then chances are their early self-concept will be positive. But if those caring for infants are consistently sad, angry, or anxious and reject the infant's pleas for attention, those infants are likely to develop negative self-concepts. Initially, infants use all their innate and early nonverbal abilities to bond with the caregivers who provide them with what they need physically to live. But by age 2, infants will have experienced a wealth of social interactions and developed a richer nonverbal vocabulary as a result. Most adults will continue to use words when interacting with them, but it will still be the vocal inflection, intensity, volume, and rhythm of those words that carry the communicative weight. Early childhood phase, ages 2 to 4. There are three major developments happening in the early childhood phase, which begins at age 2. The first is that verbal language arrives on the scene, combining with existing nonverbal language to create new ways of understanding and relating to the social world. Second is that children begin to become consciously aware of the nonverbal messages they are sending and receiving. And third is that their world expands, particularly as they start preschool, and the opportunities for nonverbal learning expand with it. At the start of this phase, you may be a bit torn between wanting to encourage the learning of new words and not wanting to abandon the tried and true baby talk and nonverbal language you have shared with your children for the past couple of years. I can relate. When my son didn't like something as a little boy, he called it chicky. Such invented words that we had used together felt like keepsakes for me, almost like our own secret code. And I found them difficult to give up. But actual words soon won out because they offered a vehicle for communication that could be understood beyond the family circle. As the parent of a young child, you've probably spent a great deal of time and effort in shaping your child's verbal language by repeating correct pronunciations of words, restating sentences using the proper grammar, and reducing the amount of baby talk that was so prevalent in infancy. Parents are understandably proud when a child starts using new, more advanced words, and may even be embarrassed if children are slow to pick up on this new way of communicating. But more sophisticated forms of nonverbal communication are being learned during this phase as well. Maturation of the brain and nervous system allows children to process and send more subtle signals in all the nonverbal channels. At this age, your child can likely make a mad face on cue and sense when you are angry or happy based on your facial expressions and tone of voice. At the same time, he is gaining more awareness of the messages he's sending and receiving via other nonverbal channels. For example, he may be starting to understand that a hug means affection and may be learning to mimic parents' rhythms. Needless to say, nonverbal communication often gets neglected once a child starts talking. As parents, we're often so excited about words that we don't pay as much attention to the nonverbal messages our kids are sending. And we become less attuned to them as a result. At the point your child knows how to ask for a hug using words, you might miss the nonverbal signs that he's looking forlorn and in need of a cuddle if he isn't verbally asking for one. During this phase, kids also become social. As a parent, you'll doubtless find yourself setting up playdates during which your child's nonverbal skills are being expanded as he interacts with peers and adults from outside the family circle. Playdates also offer children the opportunity to observe a broader range of interactions, such as conversations between adults. Through these experiences, they gain access to a richer variety of facial expressions, tone of voice, space usage, and other nonverbal information than was modeled in their immediate family. If all goes as planned, children will learn the basics of social interaction, both through play and through the corrections to social behavior made by watchful parents, caregivers, and teachers. These skills become the foundation for the next phase, when he will have to navigate these interactions without as much help in full-time school. You can think of this phase as a kind of controlled rehearsal for the relationships that will be built in late childhood. Late childhood phase, ages 5 to 10. Up to this point, parents and caregivers have been a child's main source of information and knowledge about how to relate to others. But in late childhood, when formal schooling begins, the training wheels come off and children must now learn how to relate to their peers without so much direction. Now it's time for them to test what they've learned and rehearsed in the prior phase. Learning these new sets of interpersonal skills without supervision and guidance can be incredibly difficult. Suddenly, children are surrounded by a whole new set of nonverbal vocabularies, many of which will inevitably differ from the ones they've encountered at home. For example, children from homes where gesticulations are intense and where voices are loud may miss the more subtle messages of peers and teachers. Or it could be that children from families that rarely exhibit strong displays of emotion may be terrified of loud voices on the playground, mistaking their peers' playful yelling for anger. Learning to interpret these messages correctly is a process of trial and error, and it is inevitable that errors will occur. If children are able to successfully navigate their way through this maze, they are likely to form a unique and wonderful relationship, a best friend. Arguably the most significant milestone of the late childhood phase, this usually happens around the age of 10 or 11 and is usually, but not exclusively, an intense same-sex friendship in which issues of trust and caring can be explored and resolved, giving each child insight into who they are and how they relate to others. Once these chums, as Sullivan called them, pair up, they tend to splinter off from the larger social group and spend an inordinate amount of time with each other, exploring shared interests, discussing classmates and the adults in their lives, and often divulging their innermost thoughts and secrets. What makes this friendship so important is that the two children, consciously or not, come to rely on each other for feedback about how they behave interpersonally. Sullivan called this process consensual validation because both individuals become more aware of their own behavior through the process of communicating freely with another human being. Chums provide each other not only with valuable opportunities to practice social interactions and social behavior, but also with valuable information about what they might be doing right or wrong in those interactions. Another characteristic of this unique relationship, according to Sullivan, is that it may be the first time children voluntarily put the needs and wants of others ahead of their own. These experiences will become invaluable when children enter adolescence and begin to pursue more complex friendships as well as romantic and/or sexual relationships. The anatomy of a relationship, the four-phase model. As we've seen, when your child is younger, you as a parent have a lot of control over his social life, selecting whom he should interact with, the length of the interaction, and where the interaction takes place. That changes when your child reaches school age. Suddenly, these decisions, with whom to be friends, how much time to spend with a friend, and how to spend that time together, are made largely on his own, though teachers may also play an important role. School is a place where children can begin to form rewarding friendships, but it's also a place where children can experience rejection and isolation, often because of nonverbal messages they are unwittingly sending and erroneously reading. From the late childhood phase on, any friendship a child forms follows a pattern. And this sequence, which my colleague Marshall Duke and I first codified back in the 1980s, provides a template for the relationships those children will form as adults. Children choose a likely candidate for friendship, they initiate the relationship, they deepen the relationship, and lastly, they go through a relationship transition when the social occasion, school day, week, semester, year ends. Each of these phases of the relationship requires the use of nonverbal and verbal language skills. but some skills play a more important role in certain phases than in others. Understanding the patterns by which late childhood friendships form and develop can help you identify where your child is doing well and where he may need to learn more in order to connect meaningfully with others. Choosing. The choice phase is where every relationship begins. Research shows that a child's decision about whom he's going to befriend usually takes place in a matter of seconds. This means that children are using information gathered from nonverbal cues in clothing, facial expressions, and posture to decide to approach another child. Ideally, when parents of very young children make these choices for them, they will share the reasons for their choices with their children. For example, when inviting a child for a playdate, the parent could say something like, "I think you are going to have a good time with Ravi. She always listens to me and shares her playthings with you." Not only does this sharing of information help children understand their parents' choices, but it also tells the children what is expected of them. By the time your child reaches school age, then he should already have some sense of how to choose a friend. You can imagine him faced with a schoolyard filled with children he doesn't know on the first day of school. He wants to find someone to play with. Over to his left, a few boys are playing ball, and a ball comes loose and rolls towards him. A boy in a Green Bay Packers cap runs after the ball, picks it up, and smiles. In that friendly smile, your child senses an invitation. He smiles back and begins walking toward the boy wearing the Packers cap. He has chosen to make a new friend. Initiating. The initiation phase is what happens next. Your child follows his new friend as he joins the three other boys playing ball. He waits until there's a break in what's going on. "Hi," he says with a smile, "can I join in?" The other boys introduce themselves quickly, and your child says, "I'm a Packer backer too. I've got a Packers cap at home. I'll wear it tomorrow." The boy with the Packers cap says, "Remember when they won that game when it was a million degrees below zero?" Your child excitedly comments about how the field was like ice, and soon there are 5 boys happily playing. For a 5-year-old meeting new peers for the first time on a playground, even a seemingly simple interaction like this one is a difficult task involving both nonverbal and verbal behaviors. Your child waited patiently and, sensing the rhythm of the game, chose the right moment to cut in. He didn't intrude on their game, showing his respect for their personal space. When he did introduce himself, he smiled warmly and made eye contact. Then he made small talk before he asked to join. I think we can all imagine many ways that the interaction could have gone much less successfully than it did. The initiation phase is when the real give and take of social information through nonverbal and verbal channels gets underway. Your child is in uncharted relationship waters now. For the first time, he is running his own show, and it is up to him to get this potential relationship off to a successful start. 3. Deepening. Over time, if all goes well, your child's friendships will deepen in ways that would have been all but impossible in the earlier phases of development, in which friendships are usually fleeting and revolve around a shared activity. Hallmarks of a deepening relationship include trust, self-disclosure, acceptance, and mutual understanding. As C.S. Lewis put it, a friendship is born at that moment when one person says to another, "What? You too? I thought I was the only one." The process of deepening a friendship involves a lot of give and take, much of it nonverbal. When one person speaks, the other responds not only through their words, but through facial expressions, body language, and tone of voice as well. Your child will disclose something about himself, then look to his friend to gauge the reaction. If the friend nods, smiles, or makes encouraging gestures, your child will know to keep going. As children spend more and more time together, they become increasingly attuned to the nonverbal cues that communicate what the other is thinking or feeling. They begin to inhabit the same physical space and share the same rhythms that can often be seen hugging or walking arm in arm, with smiles on their faces. Transitioning. While deepening a relationship can be hard work for some kids, virtually all children will struggle with handling relationship transitions positively. In late childhood, these transitions happen more often than you may be aware. At the end of the school day or a play date, for example. Sometimes the transition is more intense, such as the end of the school year or the Little League season or the last day of camp. Other times, a transition in a friendship happens when a child has to move to a new town or school. And of course, there are times when one or both children actively decide not to continue the friendship, whether it's over some fight or disagreement or the friendship simply having run its course. Although transitions can sometimes be painful, it's important to remember that each transition can also be a new beginning. Even as adults, transitions can make us uncomfortable. So we often rush through them as quickly as possible, without considering the unique information the experience can offer us. Picture two 10-year-old girls, Gina and Ilana, on the last day of school. These friends sat next to each other during class for the whole school year because their last names both begin with M. While not best friends, their bond has deepened over the course of the school year, and they are sad they probably won't see much of each other over the summer. As they clean out their desks, they talk about the past school year. They remember how they were so shy with each other at first. They reminisce about the science fair, field day, and other memorable events leading up to the final day of school. Not all the times were fun, though, they admit. There were disagreements, and they both remember a particularly bad one during field day when Ilana didn't choose Gina for her team. When their desks are cleaned out and have passed the teacher's inspection, it's time to leave. Each girl reaches sheepishly into her book bag and retrieves the present that they bought for the other. They hold hands as they walk out to their separate school buses. It's time to part ways. Usually, their exchanges with each other are lively, but today they are much quieter and more subdued, which makes their goodbye hugs more meaningful. In hushed tones, they tell each other to have a good summer. Transitioning is the point in the life of a relationship when you can help your child look back and see discernible patterns in how the relationship developed. Reflecting how she began, and deepened her ties with another person can yield valuable lessons that can be applied to the next set of relationships. And the more complex and important the relationship, the more she can learn from it. As we've seen, nonverbal communication plays a key role in the development of close friendships at every stage in a child's life. What this means is that if your child is struggling socially, the best thing you can do to support him is help him acquire the necessary nonverbal language. The methods for doing so, as I will show in the following chapters, are simple and straightforward. But first, we need to understand exactly what these critical nonverbal skills are and why they often take a backseat to verbal language learning. Next up, Chapter 2.